The White House is making yet another diplomatic push for a ceasefire in the Middle East with just 2 weeks before U.S. voters choose a new president. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel on Tuesday, his 11th trip to the Middle East since the war in Gaza began last year. It's also his first visit since Israeli forces killed Yahya Sinwar, the leader of the Hamas militant group. Blinken will also be discussing the spillover from the conflict into Lebanon, where Israel is fighting Hezbollah.
Kristina Kausch is from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She's Deputy Managing Director for GMF South and joins us from Madrid. Welcome to DW. What do you think Antony Blinken hopes to achieve in Israel when Benjamin Netanyahu has disregarded pretty much all US pressure, except when it's backed by a threat to withdraw military aid?
Well, Blinken wants to achieve chiefly three things. He wants to pressure Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire deal. He wants to have him allow access to humanitarian aid, and of course, he wants to prevent regional escalation. So, I think, frankly, that the chances for this visit to bear fruit are very dim, because, especially in this particular moment, Netanyahu is unlikely to have a lot of incentives at this particular moment, 2 weeks ahead of the elections, to give in and also to make any major concessions, and also to allow the Biden-Harris team to score a major win so shortly before the elections, when he is so likely to benefit from a future Trump presidency.
Okay, so what cards then does the Secretary of State have to play?
Well, there are the theory cards and the practice cards. So in theory, the United States is the first aid contributor, and including mostly military aid to Israel, almost $4 billion a year. So Israel depends heavily in all its wars, ongoing campaigns, on U.S. military aid. So in theory, you would think that, okay, so that's leverage. That's a lot of leverage. They can cut the aid, but it's not that easy. Legally, it would be possible, but support to Israel is one of the very few bipartisan consensus topics in Washington. And 2 weeks ahead of the U.S. elections, it is very difficult for the U.S. administration even to allude to putting any pressure on the Netanyahu government, because doing so would allow the Trump camp to portray them as anti-Israeli, and not doing so would allow the other side to portray them as weak. So they're really between a rock and a hard place in this particular moment, the next 2 weeks.
How about the death of the Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar? Does that represent the end of negotiations for the release of Israeli hostages, or an opportunity for a reset?
Many say it is an opportunity because Hamas is decapitated and therefore weak, and therefore might be more likely to go back to negotiation table. And also Netanyahu, since this is a major success for Netanyahu, he has, so to speak, avenged the victims of the 7th of October attacks by killing the main man behind this operation. So that is also, in theory, an opportunity, yet it doesn't give necessarily Netanyahu any additional incentives. So I would say there are some elements that make this a window of opportunity, but in a very, very cautious way. And I think the fact that we're 2 weeks ahead of the U.S. elections weigh much heavier than the advantages.
OK, thank you for that. Kristina Kausch from the German Marshall Fund of the United States.
Earlier, I spoke with our Jerusalem correspondent, Gordine, and I asked her whether the killing of Hamas's leadership could help restart ceasefire talks.
Well, right now, we're not really seeing any indication, really, that would suggest that ceasefire talks this time around would be successful, even though, of course, many have expressed their hope, including US President Joe Biden, that the death of Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader, would be a watershed moment, a window of opportunity, really, for the Israelis to declare victory in Gaza, to broker a peace deal, and to bring back the remaining hostages that are still in Gaza. But the reality on the ground in Israel looks very, very different. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the fighting will continue. He has said that a victory is only possible militarily. And what you also have to remember is that he leads a coalition government in which a lot of ministers do not want a ceasefire agreement. They want to see a continuation of the war, and they are putting significant pressure on him as well.
And Emily, there have been so many failed attempts at brokering a ceasefire. All the while, Israel has intensified its military campaign in Gaza and now in Lebanon as well. What's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy here? Do we know?
Well, at this point, the strategy seems to be to press on militarily, and the Americans have had very little sway over that. In April, the Americans asked the Israelis not to press on with an offensive in Rafah. That went ahead anyways. Also, initially, when it came to the conflict in southern Lebanon, the Americans asked for restraint. They then later on changed their rhetoric into a more supportive tone. But again, in Lebanon, we're now seeing more of an escalation. Then, of course, you have the ceasefire talks, which have seen no progress at all over the past few months. And the two sides have also not really seen eye to eye when it comes to the humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. And that even though recently a letter was published that was sent from the US government to the Israelis giving them a 30-day ultimatum to let more aid into Gaza. And if not, then they would face cuts to their military support. We've not really seen much more aid coming into Gaza. And at the same time, we have seen, though, that the Americans have deployed the THAAD air defense system to Israel in anticipation of more confrontation with Iran. So while the Americans, we're hearing a lot of rhetoric from them that they would like to see a change in course when it comes to the Israeli government and this conflict, there's also not been significant pressure, really, to warrant and to push for a change on the Israeli side.
Let's go now to our correspondent, Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Tania, a lot of time has passed since last week's killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, and a hostage deal has not gained any traction. Have the U.S. and Antony Blinken, have they missed the opportunity to capitalize on the moment?
Well, I think there appear to be different readings of the current situation, but I also have to say not much has been shared here with the media. This visit happens very much behind closed doors at the moment. So US officials had said after the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar that they see an opportunity maybe now to push for a new ceasefire that would also see the release of the remaining hostages that are being held in Gaza. But at the moment, we see no indication by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu or his government to change course, although there is, I have to say, also pressure by some parts of the society here in Israel, especially those families and relatives of these hostages. But what we are seeing is actually an intensifying conflict as well in Lebanon as well as in Gaza, with the ground invasion, especially in northern Gaza, displacing thousands of Palestinians there again. Now, another issue, what is unclear as well, is of course who will take over in Hamas, how they will position themselves with the confirmation of Yahya Sinwar's death. They had already said they will stick to their demands, that there will be no ceasefire without a full withdrawal from Gaza, and other points they've made before. Now, with the elections, as you say, only weeks away, and also with this administration being in office only a few months, it's really hard to see how the next few weeks here will play out and what impact this visit will actually have.
Yeah, the United States has threatened to suspend military aid to Israel if it does not allow more humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. I mean, is there any sign that Netanyahu is taking this seriously?
Well, I think this is one of the major concerns once again, and we've seen this over the course of the war, that the US administration has tried to push Israel to allow more aid. And we've been seeing just now since September UN the United Nations and other aid agencies have raised the alarm that not enough aid is coming in, especially when it comes also to northern Gaza. Now, the US had published, or there was this letter by the US administration saying they want to see more aid coming in, otherwise there could be, this could jeopardize possibly the transfer of weapons. But whether it will come to this is still to see, because they gave Israel about 4 weeks, and this time deadline basically is ending after the election. Now, we heard again from a top official of UNRWA today saying that 3 weeks of non-stop bombardments have created a very, very difficult situation in northern Gaza with staff. They're reporting that they cannot find food, water or medical supplies. Now, we know some supplies went in after this letter, but it's still being seen by many here as a drop in the ocean.